How to control your mind, the prefrontal cortex, is one of the most remarkable and powerful areas of the human brain. It sits right behind your forehead and serves as the control center for many higher-order cognitive functions, things like decision-making, impulse control, planning, focus, and emotional regulation. It's what allows us to pause before acting, to set long-term goals, and to override primitive urges in favor of better outcomes. When people say they want more discipline, more clarity, or more willpower, what they're really asking for is better function of their prefrontal cortex. And yet, for many, this part of the brain often feels like it's not in the driver's seat. Why is that? The answer lies in understanding how the prefrontal cortex operates. It's a very energy-intensive structure. It requires adequate levels of glucose, oxygen, and proper neural signaling to function well, unlike more primitive brain regions, such as the amygdala, which governs fear and emotional reactivity. The prefrontal cortex is relatively slow and fragile under stress. When we're sleep-deprived, overwhelmed, or distracted, prefrontal function declines. In those moments, we default to reactive, habitual, and emotionally driven behaviors rather than thoughtful responses. So, if you want to control your mind, it starts with knowing how to support and strengthen your prefrontal cortex. The first and most foundational element is sleep. Even small deficits in sleep, say getting 6 hours instead of 7 or 8, can lead to significant impairments in prefrontal activity. Cognitive tasks become harder, emotional responses become less regulated, and your ability to maintain focus drops. Deep sleep, particularly slow wave sleep, is when the brain clears out metabolic waste and restores the functional strength of the prefrontal cortex. If you're not sleeping well, you're not thinking well, period. In addition to sleep, focused mental effort is one of the most effective ways to strengthen this brain region. Think of it like a muscle. It gets stronger with use when you engage in deliberate, uninterrupted focus, what's often called deep work. You train the neural circuits of the prefrontal cortex to become more efficient. That could be 30 minutes of writing, reading something challenging, or problem solving. The key is to eliminate distractions and stay cognitively engaged with the task. Over time, this builds attentional stamina and improves your ability to control where your mind goes and how long it stays there. Another crucial tool is breath work, specifically physiological sighs. This is a naturally occurring pattern of breathing that involves 2 inhales followed by a long exhale. It's been shown in lab studies to reduce stress and rebalance the autonomic nervous system within seconds. Why is this important for mind control? Because when stress or anxiety kick in, your body goes into a sympathetic or fight or flight state. That's when the prefrontal cortex gets overridden by more reactive areas of the brain. By using a tool like a physiological sight, you can quickly restore calm and bring the prefrontal cortex back online. It's also important to know that the prefrontal cortex doesn't operate in isolation. It's deeply connected to the rest of your brain and body. Your posture, your level of alertness, and even your environment can influence how well this system functions. Sitting upright, getting sunlight in the morning, and minimizing digital distractions all send signals to your brain that it's time to focus and be intentional. What's powerful about all this is that controlling your mind doesn't have to be a mystery. It's not about willpower alone. It's about using what science tells us about how the brain works and then applying simple, repeatable tools to support that system. When the prefrontal cortex is supported through sleep, focus training, breath, and behavioral alignment, you gain a sense of control that isn't forced, but natural. You become the author of your thoughts, not just a character reacting to them. And that is where real mental freedom begins. The visual system is not just for seeing the world around you. It is a direct and powerful lever for controlling your internal state. In fact, the way you use your eyes profoundly affects your level of alertness, focus, and even emotional regulation. Most people don't realize that your eyes are literally part of your brain. During development, the eyes form as outgrowths of the brain, and they remain directly connected to deep brain structures throughout your life. This means that visual input is not simply about perception. It's about state control. One of the most important distinctions to understand is the difference between focused vision and panoramic vision. When you direct your gaze narrowly, say, when you stare at a computer screen or look intently at a specific object, your brain enters a state of heightened alertness. This visual focus sends a signal through the brainstem that increases sympathetic nervous system activity. In simple terms, it puts you into a mode of concentration and readiness where you are more likely to act or make decisions quickly. This is extremely useful when you need to perform tasks that require precision or deep thinking. However, there's a cost to staying in that state for too long. A prolonged focused vision without breaks can lead to mental fatigue, stress, and even anxiety. That's because continuous sympathetic activation keeps the body in a low-grade fight or flight mode. It narrows not only your visual field, but also your mental field. Your awareness becomes limited, and your ability to think flexibly declines. That's where panoramic vision becomes incredibly valuable. When you deliberately relax your gaze and allow your eyes to take in the entire visual scene without focusing on any one thing, you activate the parasympathetic nervous system. This is the branch of your autonomic nervous system responsible for rest, recovery, and calm. Wide-angle vision sends a neural message that you are safe and that there's no immediate threat, and that your brain can downshift from high alert to a more balanced state. This shift is not theoretical. It's measurable. Research shows that switching to panoramic vision reduces cortisol levels, slows heart rate, and even improves cognitive flexibility. It's an easy, fast, and free tool to change your mental state. You can use it during a stressful meeting, while walking, or before starting a difficult task. Just look up, soften your gaze, and let your vision widen. You don't have to see everything clearly. Just allow your awareness to stretch out. You'll notice an almost immediate reduction in mental tension. There's also a fascinating relationship between vision and internal dialogue. When people are overthinking or anxious, they tend to go into visual tunnel vision. Their eyes are fixed, blinking rate drops, and their visual world becomes small. By shifting to panoramic vision, you can break that loop. The eyes act like steering wheels for the brain. Change the direction of the gaze, and the mind will often follow. This connection between vision and mental state is deeply embedded in human evolution. When our ancestors scanned the horizon, they were in a state of calm vigilance, open to information, but not locked into threat mode. When they needed to track prey or identify danger, they used narrow vision. The modern world, unfortunately, traps us in that narrow visual mode for hours on end. Phones, screens, documents all require focal vision. If you never take time to widen your gaze, your mind gets stuck in a sympathetic dominant loop, which leads to chronic stress, irritability, and reduced mental control. But the solution is simple. Incorporate short periods of panoramic vision into your day, especially between intense bouts of focus. Even 60 seconds can reset your nervous system and bring your brain back into balance. Try it before important conversations, during breaks, or anytime you feel yourself becoming mentally rigid or emotionally reactive. By learning to consciously direct your gaze, you gain access to a powerful internal switch, one that lets you influence your mind through your body instead of trying to fight thoughts with thoughts. This is not just theory. It's how your nervous system is built. Use it. The human brain is not a fixed structure. It's constantly changing, adapting, and rewiring itself based on what we focused on and what we do repeatedly. This remarkable ability is known as neuroplasticity, and the most empowering part of it is that it can be directed. Self-directed neuroplasticity means you have the ability to shape the structure and function of your own brain through deliberate attention and action. In other words, what you consistently focus on becomes what you become. This process happens at the level of neural circuits. When you engage in a particular behavior or thought pattern, neurons fire in a specific sequence. The more frequently that sequence is activated, the stronger the connections between those neurons become. This is often summarized by the phrase, neurons that fire together, wire together. Over time, the brain begins to prioritize these well-worn paths, making them the default mode of operation. That's how habits, both mental and behavioral, are formed. But neuroplasticity is a double-edged sword. It works whether you use it intentionally or not. If you constantly focus on worries, negativity, or self-doubt, those circuits will strengthen. Your brain doesn't judge whether a pattern is good or bad. It simply reinforces what you repeatedly do. That's why mind control doesn't begin with trying to silence thoughts or force positivity. It begins with attention, consciously deciding what mental states you want to cultivate, and then guiding your focus in that direction over and over again. One of the most effective ways to harness this principle is through deliberate practice. Engaging in small, repeated efforts that target a specific mental or behavioral shift. For example, if you want to develop more confidence, you can create a protocol where you recall past moments of competence and success, visualizing them with rich detail and emotional intensity. The more vividly you can access that state, the more your brain encodes it as familiar and safe. Over time, the neural circuits associated with confidence become more accessible, and you find it easier to enter that state on demand. Emotions play a key role in this process. Neuroplasticity is accelerated when emotional arousal is present, meaning the brain learns faster when something feels meaningful or important. This is why traumatic experiences can rewire the brain so quickly, but it's also why intentional, emotionally charged practice can rewire it in positive ways. If you want to change your mind, don't just go through the motions. Connect emotionally to what you're doing. Bring intensity, belief, and focus to the practice. That's how you tell your brain, this matters. Pay attention. Another important aspect of self-directed neuroplasticity is consistency. The brain doesn't change overnight. It requires repetition. Think of it like sculpting. You're not smashing a block of marble into shape in one day. You're carving away little by little over time. 5 or 10 minutes of focused, intentional mental training each day is far more powerful than a once-a-week attempt at transformation. The key is to make it a daily rhythm, something your nervous system can come to rely on. It also helps to pair this process with reflection. Take time to notice when your brain is shifting. Track small wins. Recognize when you're reacting differently to situations that used to throw you off. These moments of awareness serve as reinforcement. They tell the brain, change is happening, keep going. And this reinforcement itself becomes a tool for further change. The more you notice growth, the more motivated you are to continue the process. Ultimately, self-directed neuroplasticity is the foundation of mind control because it puts you in the driver's seat of your own mental evolution. You're no longer a passive passenger of your thoughts or past experiences. Instead, you become an active architect, shaping your brain intentionally using focus, repetition, and emotional engagement. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be deliberate. What you do and think every day is literally building the future version of you. So the question is, what are you choosing to build? The mind and body are not separate entities. They are deeply connected through a constant feedback loop involving the nervous system, hormones, and chemical messengers. This means that one of the most effective ways to shift your mental state is by engaging your body. In fact, when it comes to controlling your mind, one of the fastest and most reliable tools is physical movement. It can interrupt negative thought loops, reset your emotional baseline, and re-engage the parts of your brain responsible for clear thinking and decision-making. When you're stuck in overthinking, anxiety, or rumination, it often feels like your thoughts are spiraling out of control. This happens because the brain's default mode network, a system of brain regions that becomes active when your mind is wandering or internally focused, kicks into overdrive. This network is essential for creativity and self-reflection, but when left unchecked, it can fuel repetitive, unproductive thought patterns. People often try to resolve this mentally, but thinking harder or trying to will yourself out of it rarely works. What does work is disrupting the loop through action. Movement is a powerful way to do that. When you begin to move your body, especially in a forward, goal-directed way, like walking, jogging, or cycling, your brain begins to shift. Forward movement activates circuits in the brainstem that are involved in suppressing overactivity in the default mode network and instead boosting the task positive network, which supports focus and engagement. This change doesn't require intense exercise. Even a 5 to 10 minute brisk walk can be enough to initiate this neural switch. From a neurochemical standpoint, movement also alters the release of key neuromodulators. Physical activity increases levels of dopamine, which is associated with motivation, drive, and the feeling of reward. It also boosts norepinephrine, which enhances focus and alertness, and serotonin, which improves mood and emotional balance. These chemicals don't just make you feel better. They prime your brain to operate more effectively. They raise the signal-to-noise ratio in the brain, making useful thoughts more accessible and intrusive ones easier to dismiss. But it's not just about chemical changes. It's also about behavior. When you physically move your body, you're signaling to your nervous system that you're not stuck. This is critical. One of the main psychological traps of anxiety or depressive rumination is the feeling of paralysis, being mentally or emotionally frozen. By moving, you break that pattern. You send a message from the body to the brain. We're not stuck. We're capable of action. That message has enormous power. It's also important to consider how posture and breathing change when we move. Movement typically encourages a more upright posture, deeper breathing, and greater awareness of the external environment. These subtle shifts create physiological conditions that make mental clarity more accessible. For example, forward motion and upright posture activate the vestibular system, which contributes to balance. Not just physical, but emotional. When you move with purpose, you create stability not just in space, but in your state of mind. Another useful protocol is to pair movement with mindful attention. Instead of zoning out during a walk, try focusing on the rhythm of your steps, the sensation of your feet hitting the ground, or the details of the environment around you. This engages sensory circuits and grounds your awareness in the present moment. It moves your attention out of abstract thought and into embodied experience, an incredibly effective way to interrupt mental chatter. It's also worth noting that physical action can include simple gestures, standing up from a chair, changing rooms, stretching, or even clenching and relaxing your fists. These small bodily shifts can act as pattern interrupters, snapping you out of looping thoughts and reestablishing a sense of control. In essence, movement is more than just physical. It's neurological, psychological, and emotional. It's a built-in tool that humans have used for millennia to regulate internal states. When your thoughts feel overwhelming or your emotions hard to manage, remember this: you don't have to fix everything with your mind. Sometimes the best way to change your mind is to move your body. One of the most overlooked yet powerful tools for controlling your mind is your ability to direct attention. Specifically, your capacity to narrow it or broaden it depending on your internal state and external demands. Attention is not just something you use to concentrate. It's an active mechanism in the brain that determines what gets processed, what gets remembered, and what emotional weight gets assigned to any given experience. In other words, attention acts like a spotlight. Whatever you shine it on becomes more neurologically significant. But attention is not a passive process. It is governed by specific neural systems, primarily in the prefrontal cortex and parietal lobe, and modulated by neuromodulators like acetylcholine. This system is trainable, and it's also hijackable. In today's world, attention is constantly being pulled outward by phones, notifications, background noise, advertising. These things may seem small, but every time your attention is fractured, it weakens your ability to control your internal state. Over time, your brain becomes trained to be in a constant state of partial focus, jumping from one thing to another without depth. This undermines not only your productivity, but your ability to manage your thoughts and emotions. When you can take back control of your attention, you take back control of your mind. This begins by developing awareness of where your attention goes and how long it stays there. Most people don't realize how often their attention is being pulled unconsciously. They feel anxious, overwhelmed, or scattered without recognizing that it's largely due to the constant redirection of attention by external stimuli. Gaining even a few moments of conscious control over your attention changes this dynamic. It puts you in the driver's seat. One powerful tool to strengthen attentional control is visual anchoring. This means selecting a single point in your visual field, an object, a shape, or even your own hand, and holding your gaze there while keeping your focus steady. This simple act quiets the mind, reduces internal noise, and improves your ability to sustain concentration. It's a neurological reset. What makes it powerful is that it's physical. You're engaging the visual system, which is tightly linked to your attentional network, and grounding your focus in something real and present. Breath-based attention is another effective strategy. By focusing on the breath, either its rhythm, its temperature, or the movement of your chest, you train the mind to return to a single point. This isn't just about relaxation. It's about building the neural circuits that allow you to notice when attention wanders and bring it back. That loop. Notice, redirect, repeat is the core mechanism behind attentional control. It doesn't require hours of meditation. Even 5 minutes a day of focus attention training can lead to measurable improvements in focus and emotional regulation. Another key element is learning to deliberately defocus. While focused attention is great for problem solving and deep work, the brain also benefits from moments of open, unfocused awareness. This is when creative insights, emotional integration, and long-term planning emerge. Practices like taking walks without your phone, letting your mind wander in nature, or simply staring out the window can activate the brain's default mode network in a healthy way. When done intentionally, this kind of mental drifting helps consolidate information and reveal patterns. Ultimately, managing your attention is about developing flexibility, the ability to zoom in when necessary, but also zoom out when appropriate. It's about building mental agility. This is a trainable skill, and every time you practice holding your attention or redirecting it intentionally, you're reinforcing the neural circuits responsible for mental control. You're strengthening the very systems that regulate your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. In a world designed to capture and monetize your attention, reclaiming it is not just a mental exercise. It's an act of autonomy. By training your attention, you create the conditions for clarity, stability, and inner direction. You become less reactive, more focused, and more capable of steering your mind where you want it to go. And that is a foundational step toward true mental control. The thoughts you allow to repeat in your mind are not just momentary occurrences. They are instructions to your brain. Each time you think a thought, especially one charged with emotion or repeated frequently, you reinforce the neural circuits behind it. Over time, those circuits become your default. This means that the quality of your internal dialogue, the way you speak to yourself, interpret experiences, and assign meaning, becomes a primary architect of your mental reality. If you want to control your mind, you must learn to take ownership of that dialogue. This process isn't about pretending everything is perfect or replacing negative thoughts with blind optimism. It's about becoming aware of the patterns in your thinking and learning to guide them in a direction that serves your growth, your goals, and your mental health. Internal dialogue is the most intimate and persistent influence on your sense of self. It's running when you're alone, when you're facing challenges, and when no one else can hear what's happening inside you. If left unchecked, it can become a source of self-sabotage. But when guided intentionally, it becomes a powerful force for clarity, strength, and change. One of the first steps in mastering internal dialogue is creating separation between yourself and your thoughts. Most people assume that every thought they have is true or that it reflects who they are. But thoughts arise from many places: past experiences, unconscious biases, external influences, even biological states like hunger or fatigue. Just because a thought is present doesn't mean it deserves your attention or belief. When you observe your thoughts like a witness, without immediate judgment, you begin to take back control. You realize, I am having this thought, not I am this thought. Language also matters. The words you use in your mind shape your emotional state and behavior. Saying, I'm terrible at this, creates a very different neural and emotional pattern than I'm learning how to do this. The brain responds to the tone and structure of your inner speech. When you use empowering language, specific, actionable, and compassionate, you prime your nervous system for resilience rather than retreat. Over time, these shifts accumulate. You're not just changing what you say. You're changing how your brain responds to challenge. Another powerful tool is the use of mental scripts or internal cues, short phrases you can call upon in key moments to guide your mind. These aren't affirmations in the superficial sense. They're functional statements that anchor your thinking. For example, during a difficult task, repeating, just stay with it, or one step at a time can recenter your attention and reduce cognitive overload. These statements create a pause between stimulus and response, allowing your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain involved in executive control, to stay engaged rather than being hijacked by emotional reactivity. Visualization can also enhance the power of internal dialogue. When you pair language with vivid mental imagery, you engage more brain regions simultaneously, which increases the strength and retention of the new pattern. Imagine yourself handling a tough conversation calmly while thinking, I speak clearly and listen openly. That pairing of thought and imagery creates a more deeply encoded experience in the brain, making it easier to recall and embody later. You should also know that changing your internal dialogue is a practice, not a one-time shift. The brain learns through repetition. The more you notice unhelpful thoughts and replace them with constructive ones, the more natural it becomes. This isn't about perfection, it's about frequency. You're training your brain to favor clarity over confusion, courage over fear, and purpose over doubt. Every repetition strengthens the circuit, and perhaps most importantly, internal dialogue affects how you interpret and recover from failure. People with resilient minds don't avoid setbacks. They speak to themselves differently when setbacks occur. Instead of, I failed, so I'm a failure, they think, this is feedback. I'll adjust and try again. That kind of internal narrative creates momentum instead of paralysis. It allows you to maintain control of your mind even in the face of difficulty. And your internal dialogue is your constant companion. It can either be a source of noise and resistance or a channel of clarity and power. The choice isn't about never having negative thoughts. It's about deciding what thoughts get your energy, your belief, and your repetition, because the thoughts you feed are the thoughts that grow. And in shaping your inner voice, you shape the very framework of your mind.